animal agriculture is the production of livestock animals to provide meat, to provide milk and other dairy products, eggs, and other products like wool and leather, etc. I want to talk to you about the environmental impact of an animal agriculture. And really there's two sides of it. Firstly, we're creating feed crops. So farmers grow feed crops to feed to the animals. So we need to look at the environmental impacts, first of all, of feed crops. And that starts with the removal of trees. So trees that have roots that hold on to the soil and keep all the soil together are removed to put fields of a monoculture. So one of the first things we need to say is that when we remove trees, it loosens up the topsoil. So when it rains, that topsoil tends to run off. And so one of the things that's contained in that runoff of water is the topsoil, is soil, and that goes out into the waterway and causes sedimentation. So one of the things we can say that we lose is sediment. Now, so I mentioned monoculture. So we're removing a natural ecosystem and replacing it with a monoculture. So that means that we've reduced biodiversity. Now, a biodiverse ecosystem is self-sustaining, but a monoculture is not. One of the things with a monoculture is that once the crop is matured, it's harvested and those nutrients are removed from the ecosystem to feed the animals. So that means that the soil becomes depleted of nutrients. And those nutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, NPK. So the solution there is to add fertiliser. So when fertiliser though is added to the soil to improve it, then that fertiliser can then run off down in the waterway as well. So the runoff might also contain fertiliser. So therefore we put increased nutrients like nitrogen, etc. into the waterway. And the issue with that is that it creates, or has the risk of creating, eutrophication. And we made another video on explaining that process of putting nutrients into a waterway and creating eutrophication. When you have a monoculture, we've got a tremendous feed source of the organism that eats that particular crop. So we have an increased amount of pest organisms, so unwanted species. So of course they're going to move in because they've got a perfect food source there. So the solution there is to add to the ecosystem, or add to the land, pesticides. And then of course those pesticides get on the crops and get then consumed by the animals. But as well as that, also the pesticides also get included in the runoff. So pesticides also run down the waterways and contaminate the waterways, and then enter the food chains in those ecosystems, and we can have biomagnification, where some of these toxins are persistent and they accumulate as we step up the food chain. As well as that, to ensure that we get high growth rates of the crops, we need to add water. And we're talking about lots of water to get the crops to grow. So to be able to do that, it's either taken out of the waterway or it's taken out of aquifers. And one of the problems with doing this is that it actually raises the water table. So that means raises the amount of water under the crops, under the soil there, under the field. Now, I'm going to explain that in another video, but what happens, the end result of that is that we get high salinity or high salinisation of the field, to the point where sometimes the field needs to be abandoned because it's just full of salt. So I'm going to explain that in another video. So salination. So let's have a look at the animals. Some of them are quite similar. So when we're growing animals on land, or maybe quite intensively in like factory farming, we have the production of waste that is high in nitrogen in feces and urine, which can then move into the waterway. Again, we have runoff from the farmland, and that runoff can contain high nitrogen waste, and again that can cause the eutrophication. As well as that, cattle are tramping the land, causing erosion of the land, loosening the topsoil, etc. So again, we can have topsoil and soil that runs off the land as well. When the cows are moving around the river banks and the banks of the stream, etc., they're causing erosion by the paths that they travel. Soil runs down to the waterway. Another thing happens when cows and other organisms, other livestock animals, move around the farm is that they can spread seeds for weeds. So they spread weeds around because the weed seeds get caught on their fur, and when they move around it washes off and we get the weeds growing somewhere else. Of course, the animals might eat the weeds and poo out the seeds somewhere else, and again it spreads the seeds. When you have a large number of animals in one area, there's the risk that they will spread disease. So the animals are often injected with or fed antibiotics, and those antibiotics could also be included in the runoff. And as well as that, whenever you have a species in a high abundance, we're going to get the pests that normally predate that species. So the treatment for that is pesticides, which can then also run off into the waterway, causing bioaccumulation. It also requires a lot of water to feed the animals as well, because they're eating these feed crops. They need to be drinking large amounts of water each day as well. So there's a high water usage again. The other thing with digesting these feed crops is that we produce a large amount of greenhouse gases in the form of methane. Methane is a very, very strong greenhouse gas, and that is a byproduct of digestion through the belching and also flatulence, the digesting the feed crops that are fed to these animals. So as you can see, there's a whole series of environmental impacts of farming agricultural animals or livestock for agriculture.